Episode 1 of 0 Day begins with a flash forward of former President George Mullen trying to open his safe. He breaks a photo and it is actually of him in a uniform with two other people on April 29, 1975. He finally opens the safe, but someone enters the room. We then cut back 3 days earlier, where George begins his morning routine. We learn here that his wife is set to join the appellate court, and he has a rift with his daughter, Alex, as he's tried to stop her from running for some position. His first meeting of the morning is with a ghostwriter. He has taken a publication deal for his memoir, but he's been delaying the first draft. Ben, the editor, wants a ghostwriter to speed up the process, and she tries to stress the importance of this memoir. George is the only president to get bipartisan support. She then spots a 1975 photo. One of the men, John Flanagan, was a childhood friend and was killed after their discharge, which inspired George to become a prosecutor. He also refused re-election despite certain victory. She hints at her unsavory rumours around this, which he can put to rest with his memoir. However, when she mentions his dead son, he kicks her out. She calls Ben and suggests that George is still plagued by the re-election and that something serious must have happened. The phones in the car suddenly go blank with the message, "This will happen again." In the confusion, a train ends up on the wrong track and runs her car over. The news reports a cyber attack that led to a national power outage. It has caused widespread accidents with planes going down, subway collisions, and medical equipment short-circuiting. Someone at the Russian consulate in New York grabs a gun while House Speaker Dreyer scrambles to put out an assuring message. We then hit day 1 after the day of the cyber attack, which is being called 0 Day. There is something in the woods and George tells the caretaker, Hector, to set up an animal trap. The news covers the aftermath of 0 Day, from missing bodies to a massive data breach. Roger from the White House arrives with a proposal. They need George to provide moral support and calm the people to reduce panic. He's hesitant, but Roger promises that it will just be a 30-minute public appearance. George arrives at a rescue site and gets to work, delegating resources in the process. The locals are angsty, calling the attack an insurance scam and conspiracy. They wind up getting physical and George has to step in. He sympathises with them and empathises the need to work together to save the common man affected by the attack. This works enough to calm everyone down, while his speech is televised on all the news channels. In the process though, a woman calls and berates Roger for hijacking her crisis management strategy. He shares that he's with her dad and she hangs up, revealing that she's actually Alex. Meanwhile, the Russian guy checks in with his IT contact, Felix, who sends him the location of a server farm. The Russian official smiles and starts shredding some papers. Mrs. Mullen is worried though, as President Evelyn Mitchell wants to see George. She reminds him that he got out with a clean break and he's not to be sucked in. We then jump to day 2, where George meets Evelyn, who is putting together a 0 Day commission to find the attackers. The commissioner has full authority here, including the power to arrest without a warrant. George is hesitant to take on the role, but he's the only one she can trust. That night, the Mullens host a party to celebrate Mrs. Mullen's appointment. Alex believes that the government has weaponized the cyber attack and George is their fall guy should things go wrong. However, he has bigger problems, as his Mossad contact, Natan, shows up. It seems that Russia's GRU has been funding a group of NY hackers led by Felix. A few months ago, someone enlisted him to put up a massive server farm in the Bronx. Nearby, Alex and Roger go head to head as she claims he only cares about his career. He insists that everything he does is for George, and she warns him that her father will become a scapegoat if he takes a commission. As George heads inside, he hears Who Killed Bambi by the Sex Pistols and he panics. He tells Hector to shut off the music, but in reality nothing is playing. He's lost in thought when Mrs. Mullen pops up. She agrees that the commission is a trap and certainly dangerous, but he is the only one who could be trusted with all of that power. Natan calls that night and George writes down something and puts the journal in a safe. The next morning though, he accepts the 0 Day commission and most of the reception is positive due to his crystal clear past. That night, he gets a harrowing call from Natan again and he rushes to open his safe. As he panics, Roger and his security detail worry about him. When he doesn't respond, they break into his study. He's in shock as the diary is filled with Who Killed Bambi and George Killed Bambi. He believes someone has broken in and replaced it, and at the end of the episode, George is about to ask Hector about his safe when he sees a different caretaker called Wayne. He's confused and Mrs. Mullen reveals that Hector actually retired 5 years ago. Episode 2 of Zero Day begins with George getting ready to fly to his new HQ in Manhattan. He recreates the night of the call with Natan. However, all he can remember is that he was the one to write the Who Killed Bambi lyrics. Elsewhere, a hacker destroys all his hard drives and heads to a Bronx hideout. He finds a Russian official waiting for him after killing the rest of the hackers. He runs as a Russian guy tries to kill him too. Back to the commission though, George has 72 hours before the White House pressures Evelyn to blame the Russians. The first brief begins, but the whole time George is not 100% and Roger notices. Melissa, the PR rep, needs a statement and Carl has something for her. The hacker massacre. The hacker and Alexei Lebedev, the GRU official, have been caught on CCTV. Due to the delicate relations with Russia, George insists on finding the hacker and getting his story first. Roger checks in on George, who insists that he's fine. There are a couple of updates though, namely that the hackers have left a code word which stands for Ukraine's Orange Revolution. However, George believes it's a bit too clumsy. As for the ghostwriter, Anna, he orders Roger to check in on her death as he recalls seeing her during his acceptance of his commission. The army also gets a hit on the hacker's face, but the data is restricted. Nearby, a hedge fund guy, Lyndon, sets up a meeting with Roger. He had actually shorted the market days before Zero Day and has insider knowledge of everything. It turns out Roger is his mole as well, due to a past debt. Lyndon wants updates on the commission and to keep their focus on Moscow. Roger claims he'll do his best, but it seems he wants to sever ties. He's also upset that George has put him on the Anna task. As for George, he comes home to his wife, Sheila, watching the news. CEO Kidder of an advanced tech company has offered her help to George, but Melissa hasn't heard of any such offer. Sheila is worried about George's breakdown at the study, but he refuses to step down. On top of all this, Mitchell informs him of a cyber attack on Russia in 48 hours time. At the same time, Kidder talks about cyber enemies apart from Russia. George waits for Natan to revert and tries to recreate the memory of their phone call, but again, he ends up failing in doing so. To make things worse, Evan Green, a news anchor, talks about George being senile and unfit to lead the commission. It seems that he dropped out of the presidential race at the last minute during the re-election. That night, Roger goes to the morgue and finds Anna's body missing. We then cut forward to day 5, where Carl reveals that the hacker is theirs and is an undercover NSA agent. Roger updates George about Anna as well, and he wonders if he indeed saw her at the press conference a day after she supposedly died. Back home, Sheila begs Valerie, their former chief of staff, to join the commission. Valerie is not interested though, but Sheila trusts her to protect George, who is among the wolves. As fate would have it, it turns out she's actually right, as Drea has set up an oversight committee led by Congresswoman Alex. She claims she will keep the commission in check, and the internet goes wild, questioning George's credibility. Desperate, the commission sends Roger to speak to her. While George is upset about Sheila's hiring decision, Roger visits Alex. They're quite familiar with each other, as Roger sympathises with Alex when she explains that she never wanted to oversee someone as stubborn as George. It turns out, Roger was the last man remaining when George quit the re-election campaign. In another shocking turn of events, Roger and Alex are actually friends with benefits as they wind up hooking up. Back to the investigation though, George subtly threatens Admiral Bernard and gets the file on the undercover hacker, Patrick. Fortunately, they're able to arrest him before Alexei can kill him. As the GRU official is leaving though, a truck driver runs him over. Roger updates Melissa that it was a bust with Alex. As he stops by his place, he spots the truck driver. He's actually a GRU agent as well and claims Russia is not involved. Alexei was in over his head and they eliminated him as a result. As an olive branch, they offer a lead to the true attackers who hired Felix's group for Zero Day. And at the same time, Patrick is being interrogated and he claims the hackers were hacktivists who want to show the world the danger of digitalization. Someone tricked them into coding the Zero Day bug. The GRU agent's intel points to Reapers, a North Dakota terror organization, and Mitchell is able to call off her cyber attack on Russia. However, Evan Green continues to berate George, comparing him to war criminals. He quotes something that he'd done on the night Natana called, and George realizes he was watching Green's program at that moment. Because of this, he's finally able to recreate the night and remembers Natan talking about Proteus being a weapon. He holds a press conference to update the nation about Reaper and this Proteus. Mitchell is not happy though, as Russia would have unified them while inter-conflict will create problems. As the episode comes to an end, Jeremy from the CIA claims George is shady. Reapers is a real terrorist organisation, but Proteus is actually a government program. Mitchell is surprised and he pulls out a top secret file, leaving things on a tenuous knife edge. Episode 3 of 0 Day begins with Evan Green getting ready for his show. Within this, he questions the existence of the Reaper and berates George for mass arresting people and blaming the common American man. Meanwhile, George throws his pills after reading about the side effects. Valerie replaces Roger and they throw barbs at each other. She takes his office and insists all George's visits are now to go through her. She also comments on George being Roger's NA sponsor, and we learn Roger is actually a recovering addict. In return, Roger brings up her affair with George, explaining the former president's concern when Sheila rehired Valerie. At the same time, Jeremy warns George to play a certain way, but he refuses to do so. Jeremy thinks he's threatening them with Proteus, but George has no idea what he's actually talking about. We now reach day 15, and there has been no progress after the mass arrests. Drea orders Alex to investigate George, while Evan Green claims George has arrested Paul, a Mexican kid, with no reason. Alex needs to use a daughter card to get answers and she hates it. Drea claims no one will question her authority if she brings order to the commission, and she eventually gives in. Elsewhere, George tells Roger to bring proof that Anna is truly dead and buried. He also asks him to refill his prescriptions, which pretty much annoys Roger. On top of that, Lyndon threatens Roger with releasing proof that he's a mole for not pinning 0 Day on Russia. Alex calls for an appointment and learns that Valerie has taken over as chief of staff. She's upset with Sheila for it, but her mother claims she only cares what's best for George. Things are looking bad though, as the commission has no record of arresting Paul. Evan Green continues to weave conspiracy theories involving George around this, and his approval rate starts falling as a result. The influencer also exposes Lyndon's activities before 0 Day and how he has not been arrested. Meanwhile, Alex visits George to ask about the mass arrests, but he refuses to explain himself to the committee. At the cemetery, Roger finds a body in Anna's coffin and has a DNA test done. Suddenly, Nathan shows up and claims that both he and George have to disappear. They, whoever they are, have gotten to George and he can't win. Nathan also asks if George is seeing or hearing things, and Roger is confused by the unhelpful visit. Carl finally learns that they were supposed to arrest Paul's brother and work on freeing him. Mitchell is wavering under public scrutiny though, and the commission is worried about losing her support. They wonder if they need to drop the Reaper lead and look elsewhere. George goes with his gut though and looks into the interrogations. The only worthwhile arrest is Hayes from North Dakota, under whose name the wire transfers were done. When Hayes refuses to crack, George decides to personally question him after going through his file. The former president is charming at first, bonding over their shared military experience. Once Hayes opens up though, George quickly turns on him by threatening his immigrant friend, sick dad and 7-year-old son. He walks off confidently, but suddenly overhears who killed Bambi. There are protests going on outside when Lyndon drags Roger to his yacht. He gives him one more chance to take down Green for putting him on blast. To make things easier, he also has intel on Anna. Roger refuses to manipulate George, but Lyndon reminds him of the dirt he has on him. Meanwhile, Hayes breaks and talks about Leon, the one who came up with 0 Day in the first place. Their server farm is in Idaho, and George notices that Hayes quotes George Orwell just like Green does. Valerie and Carl don't think much of it, but George is certainly suspicious of the coincidence. Suddenly, Who Killed Bambi plays, but this time it keeps glitching. He tries to search for the source, but unfortunately can't find it. We then cut to day 18 and they break into the Idaho server farm and find that someone has tried to burn the equipment. Roger refills George's prescription and shares Lyndon's intel. Hayes and Green are actually classmates. They've also been spotted at the same place multiple times over the years, and at one event, even Anna was present. Valerie wants to focus on the farm as the evidence around Green is circumstantial at best. But with the influencer constantly goading George, the former president shuts her down and orders Carl to arrest Green without a warrant. While everyone is distracted, a curious Roger goes through George's diary. The entries talk about the music, someone controlling it, Anna, and Who Killed Bambi itself, which worries Roger. As we soon find out, there is actually a leak, and the news reports Green's connection to Hayes. Drea tells Alex about Green's forceful arrest and their need for an instant plan of action. Roger is overwhelmed by the situation though, as he drinks and kisses Alex. Similarly, Valerie meets Jeremy in hopes of reining in George. She wonders why George brought up Proteus, and we learn that he was the one who actually ordered the program to be shut down in the first place. Jeremy claims someone else has actually resumed it. And as episode 3 comes to an end, George visits Green in prison and winds up mocking him. Episode 4 of Zero Day begins with a large bank called American Homestead facing a cyber attack. The government freezes all financial activity to stop further attacks. But unfortunately, this doesn't go well as the locals have no money and begin rioting. Drea tries to take control of the bank case, but Mitchell refuses. Meanwhile, George is busy questioning Evan Green after more evidence has popped up of the influencer colluding with the Reapers. But Green is his usual cocky and evasive self. His lawyer, Bob, tries to make him understand the severity of the situation and how he won't get any of his human rights due to the commission arrest. He needs to talk even if he simply invited the Reapers as guests on his show. It's also pretty suspicious why he's erased his hard drive before his arrest. The commission is a PR nightmare though, as negative rumours start swirling, encouraged by CEO Monica Kidder. Even the news channels that back George are calling him ineffective. Melissa wants to try and change the narrative and show that George is open and transparent by testifying, but he refuses until they have an answer. The next strategy is to invite Kidder, who just wants a seat at the table. A desperate Valerie visits Mr. McKenna about Proteus, as he is the original scientist. Everyone else is dead and someone has revived it. It turns out this is actually a neurological weapon that violates the Geneva Accords. It can cause brain trauma from a distance, and the origin can never be traced as it uses radio waves. We then jump to day 20 and Green finally talks to Carl. He insists he knows nothing and just has the emails of the Reapers. Valerie has the results of the burnt Idaho server farm though, which has a couple of code names. Roger is surprised though, as he's heard of them when he was brought to Lyndon's yacht. Meanwhile, Valerie tells George about Proteus. What's surprising is that he should have known what kind of weapon it was since his office shut it down. She shows him his symptoms: dementia, psychosis, sleep deprivation, stress, mood swings, impulsivity, hallucinations and memory gaps. He confesses to actually having these symptoms and they realise he has been targeted. Roger unknowingly starts looking into it as he checks the radio equipment found at the Idaho farm. He buys a new radio and tunes into the same channel as it was last on. Elsewhere, Drea convinces Mitchell that George needs to quit to protect her from any blowback. He quit the re-election because of his son's death, and Drea hints that if something similar happens, George will quit again. Is Drea going to kill Alex? Speaking of which, Alex tells Sheila she is worried about George. Green and Kidder's followers protest outside George's house, and Sheila decides to take matters into her own hands. Through all of this, George finally meets with Kidder, and it's clear her ego has been hurt as he refused to help her initially. He gets straight to the point as he points out the damage she is doing to the country and how she's benefiting from it. She can either help them by calming the public or just up and leave. Mitchell tells George he has 24 hours to find a link between the bank attack and Zero Day. After that, she will unfreeze the financial infrastructure, much to his chagrin. She's confident they're not connected as Drea has proof of a similar bank attack last spring. George is frustrated with Drea for hiding such information, and he also believes that the Zero Day malware is also in their financial servers, but Mitchell doesn't agree. Roger then overhears a man on the radio sharing some coded message which he notes down. He calls Alex and wishes they could run away before visiting a bar. Lyndon's man shows up and tells him to get George to step down. He can do it by bringing evidence that George is not of sound mind, but if he doesn't comply, they will tell Alex all of Roger's dirty secrets. Sheila shows up at HQ and learns of Proteus. She wants George to step down, but he insists that he's fine. She doesn't believe him and wants him to take a psych evaluation just to be on the safe side. While this is happening, Roger goes through George's journal, which proves he is unstable. He then heads to Alex and gets drunk. He reminisces about their time together and how much he loves her. She was the one who actually got George to hire him in the first place, and he's the one who hacked her phone to publicly expose her ex because he wanted to get her back. She's shocked as he leaves. At home, Lyndon's man shows up and Roger refuses to be their pawn. It's the wrong move though, as several thugs barge in. They drug him and drown him in the bathtub. George's psych evaluation though comes back perfect except for one question. When asked if there is ever any music playing, he pretends that there isn't, and while it isn't, he continues to hear Who Killed Bambi, but this time he is aware that it is a Proteus symptom. The rest of the evaluation results prove that George is of sound mind, and there are only certain moments when Proteus takes over. Sheila is upset because this means all of George's missteps have been his own, and he hasn't been manipulated into these actions. George is beyond caring as he has wasted enough time on this. To speed things up, he has Carl torture Green. Unfortunately, it seems that Green doesn't know anything, but George refuses to stop the torture. In fact, Green had simply erased his hard drives as he has been money laundering. The next morning, Mitchell gets a tip that the bank attack is by the same guys who attacked last spring, and they are called Sinecure. Alex is shocked by Roger's death while George gets PTSD. His son died of an overdose while Who Killed Bambi had been playing on his radio. At present, George notices that Roger's bathroom is similarly scrambled with drugs. Turns out, Lyndon's men have framed the murder as a drug overdose. At the end of episode 4, George looks lost in thought. He looks at his journal, which looks like the ravings of a lunatic. Annoyed, he hides it in his drawer. Episode 5 of 0 Day begins with Evan Green being freed. Bob calls out George for acting like a dictator, while the public turns against him with rumours of CIA-level torture being inflicted on Green. George tells Sheila how he saw his son try to skateboard and fall. He never gave up and George was proud, but he never told him as he was busy. He wishes things would have been different with Roger, and Sheila comforts him as a result. He tells her not to defend him and tell the truth, as the Oversight Committee has called her to testify against him. Drea threatens Mitchell that he has bipartisan support that she does not. She can't dissolve the commission, but simply hand it to him. She knows he's dangerous as he is also actively running against her, which he doesn't deny. Carl and Valerie wonder if the commission helped in any way, like deterring impending attacks. To make things worse, photos of Anna, Hayes and Green that Lyndon gave Roger are now declared deep fakes. The commission believes Roger felt guilty for waylaying them and killed himself. The committee hearing does take place and Drea keeps attacking George with unproven allegations. Sheila tells the truth the whole time, but all of it paints George in a good light, which Melissa confirms. Roger's funeral then takes place and it's a pretty somber affair. Valerie tries to stop George from attending, but he goes all the same. Once there, a flashback shows him fighting with his son after catching him using drugs. After the funeral, George and Alex have a bittersweet conversation. She calls her brother's death a suicide, but he insists that he actually OD'd. He regrets hurting his family and Roger and wishes he'd actually listened to her in the first place. That night, he writes his resignation letter in his journal. As he flips through it, he finds a letter from Roger. This is actually a transcript of what he heard on the radio and his assumptions of Lyndon's participation in 0 Day. The commission then starts focusing on decoding the messages sent via the radio frequency. Finally, a coder hacks it and reveals they are indeed the 0 Day attackers. We're now up to day 25 and George shares the findings with Mitchell, specifically how the bank attack was not 0 Day but actually copycats. Lyndon has disappeared and the Idaho server farm was theirs. Mitchell tells him about Drea's threat, but does all she can to get George another 24 hours to bring her names. Drea is annoyed and fills in Alex. She's frantic as she can't actually reach George. Desperate, she calls Valerie and insists George needs to update the committee on their findings or quit before they destroy him. Valerie doesn't take her concern seriously and inevitably hangs up. However, they set up a trap the next day. George poses as Lyndon and claims Roger has evidence in his apartment. It's touch and go for a while, but the attackers fall for it. 2 hours before Drea takes over, Leon, aka Blake Felton, shows up at Roger's apartment. Melissa spots something odd in his file, and it turns out he actually works for Kidder. They arrest him and get a search warrant for Kidder. At her home, she refuses to let Carl and his squad in. Instead, she live streams and mocks George for his forceful and illegal methods. George knows this is a trap as the public is waiting for Carl to force his way in. We see that Kidder is stalling as she tries to get in contact with the 0 Day attackers. Turns out they've actually cut her loose, and desperately, she calls George and Valerie. She tells them she'll talk, but only with full immunity. If they don't agree, she'll reveal that Valerie's daughter, Lily, is George's. Everyone is shocked, but before they can make a decision, shooters from Kidder's home attack Carl's squad. Kidder is confused as she has not actually ordered the attack. Carl is shot in the chaos, and this gives the squad leeway to enter the home and arrest Kidder. Given this mad turn of events, Mitchell is relieved with the breakthrough as the squad find evidence that Kidder's company, Panoply, bought and spread the 0 Day malware. The investigation is over and the public rejoices as a result. They believe it's revenge because the government was investigating Panoply for violating antitrust laws. Just then though, Jeremy gets a call and decides to visit New York. However, Alex panics and begs Drea to shut something down. He tells her to go through the proper channels and we see her pull out a radio and tune into a channel. George goes home and and thanks Sheila for being by his side. However, he knows Kidder is not the end of it and she is simply the fall guy. And unfortunately he's right, as Valerie calls with a distressing update. And at the end of episode 5, we find out that Kidder has been hanged in her prison cell. Episode 6 of Zero Day begins with Alex confronting Drea and the Congress members who have sided with him. They all orchestrated Zero Day to show the weakness in the country, unite everyone, and share a new proposal on how to govern the country. Alex panics at how badly things have gone wrong, as they had not foreseen Mitchell launching the commission and giving it to George. Alex wants them all to come clean, but Drea subtly threatens that their insidious partners certainly won't agree to this. She calls her parents as she wants to tell them, but Drea launches another zero-day power outage, this time lasts much longer. The commission has some clue about the malware and starts working on bringing the power back. George's security detail claims he is a target and they need to leave. They're actually surrounded by a mob near his gate, and things get physical as guns and Molotov cocktails are involved. However, the CIA shows up in time and scatter everyone. Sheila meanwhile is sent to Valerie's, while Jeremy reveals that Drea had put a hit on George. They're going to use it to their advantage and claim that George is actually dead. He also assures him that he and Mitchell are the only ones who are on his side, while there are several officials who are part of Zero Day. George connects the dots and meets Alex, who breaks down. She explains that she just wanted to fix things with Zero Day and certainly didn't expect people to die. She doesn't know what to do next, and he inevitably hugs her. Elsewhere, Drea gives a public condolence to George and claims he will possibly be the next commissioner. His happiness is short-lived though, as George confronts him. Drea knows he's lost, but points out that if he's exposed, Alex will also take the fall and go down as well. The best way out of this is for him to retire once his term is up, and for George to pin Zero Day on Kidder. While this is happening, the commission is finally able to bring back the power. The White House claim the investigation is over, and George will announce the results at the press conference. While he works on the report, both Sheila and Mitchell request him to pin it all on Kidder for different reasons. Sheila can't lose another kid and believes they're the ones at fault for failing Alex. As for Mitchell, she believes the country will destroy itself if it learns the government can't be trusted. She appeals to George's humanity, as she brings up how she knows he backed out from the re-election to protect his illegitimate daughter, Lily. George gives in when he hallucinates his son and finds a Proteus bug in the bird feeder. Drea is delighted that his reputation is saved. Valerie investigates the bug but can't seem to find anything odd about it. George's doctor claims that hallucinations and memory gaps could also be because of the stress. Valerie claims that whether it's the Proteus or the stress, it's all over now. However, before the hearing, Alex leaves a letter for George. As he reveals his findings in the press conference, he keeps seeing the lyrics to Who Killed Bambi on the prompter. He realises that he should have been there for his son, and now he can do that for Alex by doing what she wishes. So George reads out Alex's letter, where she exposes Drea, the other congressman, and inevitably herself. Turns out Alex has actually already turned herself in, and Sheila looks sad as a result. Mitchell is surprised when George announces that a commission has ended, but the president will do everything she can to bring justice. Drea is furious though, as he claims George has condemned their country, but George believes it's just another chance to make things right and save America. The public applauds George for his efforts and for doing the right thing, even if it means turning in his own daughter. George goes home and finds that Sheila is not actually there. He then burns all the incomplete drafts of his memoir, as there is more work to be done. But the next morning, he changes his routine and goes running on a different route, signifying a very different change of state for George's mindset. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.